I can't forgive myself for completely misreading Jinu the first time I watched K-pop Demon Hunters. I was so focused on his role as the antagonist, so ready to write him off as just another charismatic villain with a sob story, that I completely missed the devastating psychological complexity of what this character actually represents. I dismissed his tragic backstory as manipulation tactics. I rolled my eyes at his connection with Rumi. I thought his sacrifice was just a predictable redemption arc. I was so wrong, it physically hurts. Because Jinu isn't just the leader of the Saja Boys, or Guima's reluctant dragon, or even Rumi's complicated love interest. He's a 400-year-old walking trauma response. A man so fundamentally broken by a single moment of desperate selfishness that he's spent centuries drowning in guilt while convinced he deserves every second of his torment. And I cannot stop thinking about how his markings of shame literally spread across his body as his self-loathing intensifies. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel where I dive way too deep into animated characters and emerge with feelings I didn't ask for. If you're new here and you enjoy psychological breakdowns that will ruin you emotionally, definitely hit that subscribe button because we're about to unpack one of the most devastating antagonists I've ever encountered. Let me paint you a picture. You're watching K-pop Demon Hunters, and this gorgeous, dark-haired guy shows up leading a demon boy band. He's got the perfect K-pop idol look. He's charming, he's strategic, and he's actively working to destroy our protagonists. Classic antagonist setup, right? Wrong, because here's what gets me about Jinu. Every single thing that makes him dangerous, every manipulation tactic, every moment of cruelty, it all stems from one devastating psychological truth. He genuinely believes he's a monster who deserves to suffer forever. And the most heartbreaking part? He's not wrong about having done something monstrous. He's just wrong about being unable to change. Think about this for a second. 400 years ago, Jinu was a human living in crushing poverty with his mother and sister. He played the bipa on the streets just trying to survive, and it wasn't enough. Never enough. When Guima offered him a deal, a beautiful voice and life of luxury in exchange for his soul, Jinu didn't hesitate. But here's the kicker. The deal came with a cruel twist. He got his fame and comfort, but his family was left behind. Some accounts suggest he willingly abandoned them to enjoy his new life. That's his original sin, not making the deal. Desperation doesn't make you evil, but choosing his own comfort over his family's well-being, that's the choice that damned him, literally and figuratively. And here's where it gets psychologically fascinating. Jinu doesn't just feel guilty about this. He's organized his entire identity around being the kind of person who would make that choice. For 4 centuries, Guima has been whispering in his ear, reminding him of every fault and failure. But the most devastating weapon in Guima's arsenal isn't the supernatural torture. It's the truth. Jinu did abandon his family. He did choose selfishly. And because he can't forgive himself for that moment of human weakness, he's trapped in this cycle where he keeps proving he's the monster he believes himself to be. There's this concept in psychology called a trauma response loop, where people get stuck repeating patterns that confirm their worst beliefs about themselves. That's Jinu's entire existence. He believes he's irredeemable, so he acts irredeemably, which confirms he's irredeemable, which makes him act worse, and on for literal centuries. But then Rumi happens. Their relationship is this perfect storm of mutual recognition and desperate need. When Jinu discovers Rumi's half-demon heritage during that bathhouse fight, something shifts. For the first time in 400 years, he's looking at someone who understands the specific hell of being caught between human and demon nature. Someone else with markings of shame. Someone else drowning in self-hatred. Here's what clicked for me about their dynamic. Jinu doesn't fall for Rumi despite her demonic side. He falls for her because of it. She represents the possibility that maybe, just maybe, having demon nature doesn't automatically make you a monster. When she keeps her secret, when she chooses to trust him, when she sees past his antagonist role to the broken person underneath, that's revolutionary for someone who spent centuries believing he's fundamentally irredeemable. Notice how their duet, Free, is described as the closest thing to an overt love song in the film. But it's not just romantic, it's existential. They're singing about the freedom to be something other than what their nature dictates. For Jinu, that's freedom from Guima's control, yes, but more importantly, it's freedom from his own self-imposed prison of guilt and shame. That's when I realized the genius of Jinu's character design. The markings of shame that cover his body aren't just visual indicators of his demonic nature, they're literally spreading as his self-loathing intensifies. His guilt is eating him alive, manifesting as physical corruption. But when he connects with Rumi, when he experiences moments of genuine care and understanding, Guima's voice fades, the psychological torture lessens, the markings stop spreading, which makes his betrayal of Rumi even more devastating. Everyone says Jinu's villain turn at the Idol Awards proves he was always irredeemable, but I think that completely misses the psychological horror of what's actually happening. Guima doesn't just threaten Jinu with more torture, he forces Jinu to confront the full truth of his original betrayal. He reminds Jinu that he didn't just make a desperate deal, he willingly chose luxury over family. And then he threatens to make the voices even worse unless Jinu proves his loyalty by destroying the one person who's ever seen good in him. It's psychological warfare at its most insidious. Guima is essentially saying, you want to believe you can change? Prove you're still the selfish monster who abandoned his family by abandoning this girl who trusts you. And Jinu breaks. He exposes Rumi's secret, watches her world crumble, and immediately realizes he's just confirmed every horrible thing he's ever believed about himself. That's his "I've come too far" moment. Not because he's actually irredeemable, but because he's just proven to himself that he is. The tragedy is that Rumi's reaction doesn't confirm his worst fears. She doesn't hate him. She doesn't call him a monster. She's hurt, devastated, but she still sees the complexity in him, still recognizes the pain driving his choices. But Jinu can't see that because he's so deep in his self-loathing spiral. Think about how this connects to real-world psychology. How many people do you know who are trapped in patterns of self-sabotage because they've internalized the belief that they're fundamentally flawed? Who push away anyone who gets too close because they're convinced that person will eventually see the real them and leave? Jinu's story is extreme, obviously. Most of us aren't literal demons bound to evil overlords, but the psychological pattern is heartbreakingly familiar. This is where I want to challenge the popular reading that Jinu's sacrifice is just a classic redemption arc. I think it's more complex than that. His heroic moment isn't about earning forgiveness or proving he's actually good. It's about finally choosing love over fear. There's this line from Dostoevsky that haunts me. Above all, do not lie to yourself. A man who lies to himself and listens to his own lie comes to a point where he does not distinguish any truth either in himself or anywhere around him. Jinu has been lying to himself for centuries, telling himself he's irredeemable, that he deserves his suffering, that he's incapable of being better. But when Guima attacks Rumi, all those lies fall away and he acts from pure instinct. Not the instinct of a demon, but the instinct of someone who loves. His sacrifice isn't about atonement in some cosmic sense. It's about finally, after 400 years, making a choice based on love instead of fear or guilt or self-hatred. He dies free not because he's earned redemption, but because he's finally stopped believing he doesn't deserve it. And that soul he gives to Rumi, that's not just a power-up for the final battle. It's symbolic proof that he always had something worth saving, even when he couldn't see it himself. That's what makes Jinu's arc so devastating and beautiful. He doesn't become good through suffering enough or doing enough heroic deeds. He becomes free by accepting that he was always more than his shame, his guilt, and his mistakes. The visual storytelling supports this interpretation brilliantly. Notice how Jinu's design is deliberately more human-looking than the other Saja boys. His natural black hair among their colorful styles, his more understated appearance, these aren't accidents. They're visual reminders that beneath the demonic exterior, his essential humanity never fully disappeared. And when his markings of shame finally fade as he makes his sacrifice, it's not because he's earned the right to be unmarked, it's because he's finally stopped believing the marks define him. This character represents something we see across cultures and throughout human history. The archetypal pattern of the person who makes one catastrophic choice and spends the rest of their life either running from it or trying to atone for it. It's Judas, it's Macbeth, it's every tragic figure who becomes trapped by their own perception of their unforgivable act. But Jinu's story suggests a different possibility. What if the real tragedy isn't the original sin, but the centuries we spend punishing ourselves for it? What if redemption isn't about earning forgiveness, but about accepting we were always worthy of love? Here's what I keep coming back to. Jinu's story is ultimately about the difference between accountability and self-destruction. He needed to acknowledge the harm he caused his family, the selfishness of his choice, the pain he inflicted. That's accountability. But spending 400 years believing he deserved eternal torment? That's not justice, that's just another form of violence. The most sophisticated psychological insight in his character arc is that healing doesn't require minimizing or excusing our worst choices. It requires expanding our understanding of ourselves to include both our capacity for harm and our capacity for love. Jinu's tragedy was never that he made a selfish choice. It was that he let that choice define his entire understanding of who he could be. When he saves Rumi, he's not becoming a different person. He's finally acting like the person he always had the potential to be, even in his worst moments. The person who loved his family enough to make a desperate deal for them in the first place. The person who kept secrets to protect someone he cared about. The person who found genuine connection even in the depths of his shame. That's the real heartbreak of Jinu's character. Not that he fell so far, but that he stayed down so long when he always had the capacity to rise. So here's what I want you to think about. Is Jinu's 400-year journey towards self-acceptance ultimately a story about the power of love to redeem even the most lost souls? Or is it a story about how shame and self-hatred can trap us in cycles of suffering long after our original mistakes? And if someone in your life is carrying their own markings of shame, What does Jinu's story suggest about the difference between holding people accountable and holding them prisoner to their worst moments? Let me know in the comments what you think about Jinu's character arc, whether you see his sacrifice as redemption or liberation, and if you've noticed other examples of characters whose shame becomes their prison. And if this analysis destroyed you emotionally like it did me, definitely hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives that will ruin your week. Thanks for watching, and remember, we're all more than our worst moments, even when we can't see it ourselves. I'll catch you in the next video where we'll probably dive into another character who will make me question everything I thought I knew about storytelling psychology. Until then, keep digging deeper into the stories that matter.